Welcome to the Safari Mission Podcast.
I'm Reverend Vidar Ligard. We are here together with Reverend Catherine Ligard as well. And today we are going to talk about budgeting, something that impacts us all every single day, day-to-day finances.
Yes, and you know the word budgeting, it's not really anyone's favorite word. Because when you hear budgeting, what comes to your mind is discipline. That's really not something that people really love to hear about, right?
It's not really a fun activity to do. It's not something I look forward to doing when we do it, but it is a must if you're going to move forward financially, which God wants us to do. He wants us to be the head and not the tail financially. And one of those disciplines, one of those things that must be done is budgeting.
Right. Even, if you look in Proverbs chapter 13, verse 18, this is in the NIV version, it even says, whoever disregards disciplines comes to poverty and shame, but whoever heeds correction is honored.
Disregarding discipline, we have a good number of friends who are dollar millionaires. And one of the common themes in all of the lives of the ones that I know is that they're very disciplined, they're very consistent. They know the actions that need to happen on a consistent basis, and they do them, whether they feel like it or not. There's certain things that needs to get done. It needs to get done right so that you can be where you need to be in order to be the head and not the tail.
And what's very interesting is what I have observed is that they're not just disciplined with finances, they're disciplined in their life in general. They are up early in the morning, they exercise very often, they read books, and so you see they're also disciplined in other areas, because what tends to happen is however you are in one area of your life, that's who you are as a person. So that spills over into other areas of life. And so one of them is finances, and one of the disciplines that's needed in finances is budgeting, because a budget tells you where the money should go every single month.
Right. So practically, how do we start? How do we get to where our outflow is less than our income? How do we get to the place that we're actually spending less than what we're making?
Well, first of all, you need to know where your money is going. You need to put it down on paper. And a lot of times, if you've never done budgeting, if you are not used to following a budget, you usually don't know where your money goes. So the first thing I tell people is we need to find out how much are you spending on the different categories. How much is your rent? How much is your utilities? How much is your transportation payment? How much is your food payment, for groceries or eating at all? And how much are going to all these other things, and how much are you really just wasting along the way? And even before we get to that, what is your income every month? A lot of people don't know either. They don't know their income and they don't know their outflow, and it's just a big chaos.
So step one is track what you're currently doing with your money.
Yes.
Take 1 month and write everything down, whether it's an Excel spreadsheet or a piece of paper. You make the categories that you think your money is going to, eating out, groceries, rent, utilities, transport, giving, school fees for kids, giving money to parents who may be living up country. Make all those categories on a sheet. And then every single day, you keep track of every single penny, every single shilling you're spending, and you add it into those columns so that at the end of the month, you will know exactly where and how you've spent your money.
Yes, and if you haven't started yet, it's always good to go back even 6 months to see your pattern. If you use, like in Kenya, if you use a lot of M-Pesa, you can go to Safaricom and get the M-Pesa statement. And you can look at also, you look at all the outflow, and then you categorize them into these boxes. This was actually food, this was actually transportation, this was for this was for the other. If you are in another country, maybe you're used to using a card a lot, a bank card or credit card, you go find those statements and you go track back maybe 6 months. So for every month you put up the categories, how much have I been spending? And then you realize, oh, I'm spending so much more in this area than I thought I would. Now going forward from today, you start tracking every cent, every penny, whatever currency you have. You start tracking everything so that you can measure how much you're spending, and you can track it and you can know for sure. A lot of time we walk on assumptions. We assume we're spending this much. We assume we are doing this. We think we are. We're pretty sure we are. But that's not the same as the actual real facts. What are you spending? And numbers don't lie unless you mess them up on purpose, but then you wouldn't be honest to yourself. If you're not honest with yourself, you're not going to change. And so what we have to do is to get the honest answer. Sometimes reality is a bit brutal. We don't like to face it, but it's the only way to make changes is to first face where you're at and first find out what you're currently doing. And when you know what you're currently doing, you can make adjustments and you can tell the money where it needs to go every month.
Yes. So I know that if you've never done this before, that the typical response is after you find out how you're actually spending the money, most people will be very surprised. Some people think, well, I'm buying one coffee once in a while. But at the end, you come to the end of the month, you find out you're spending a whole lot more on buying a coffee out.
Yep.
Or maybe you're adding airtime on Safaricom. That might happen every day, every 2 days, whatever. When you come to the end of the month, you might be really surprised by how much you're spending just in airtimes and data bundles. And so there's different categories, and typically different ones have different habits you don't think about. It might be buying that Safaricom credit. It might be buying that coffee. It might be stopping at a particular shop every single morning to buy your favorite mandazi or something like that. But usually there is some surprise that you get when you start recording everything that you're spending.
Yes, I've never seen someone who hasn't been surprised. And sometimes that's where we are like, we don't want to face it because it's a difficult reality to take in. But it is only when we can face the reality we currently have that we can make changes to our reality. So you have to first face the truth. And you have to not, lie to yourself because that's not going to help you at all. So you got to start with that. You got to put it down. And then when you see what you're spending, you also realize which categories you have to stop spending in or spend a lot less in because there's not enough money to do it. And so that's where changing habit comes in, which is the hardest part. It's easy to put a budget on paper. We can all do that. That's the easy part. But following it is the hard part because that means you need to discipline yourself. You have to tell yourself no when you want that coffee, you want that chai, you want that mandazi, you want that thing that you just happen to spend on. You have to tell yourself, no, I can't. And that's when it's hard. It's not so hard to put it on paper, but it's following it that is hard.
Right. So then we've done step one. We have tracked all of our money. How now do we get to where our outflow is less than our income? What's the next step?
Right. Well, it is to put up a budget where you put down your total inflow of money. If you have a job, if you have a business, and some people have, they don't have a steady income. It varies what they get in. So what I say is, okay, take the average you're getting in for at least the last 6 months or maybe a whole year and find out if you average that out, what is typical. That means when you get a lot of money, you can't spend it all because that has to stretch over several months. And so that depends on your situation. If you have a steady job and you get the same every month, it's a bit easier because at least you know what your income is. But some people, they just live off of maybe offering if they're a minister and it's not the same every week or every month. And some people live off of business and that varies. So you want to be conservative with your income. You always want to budget with the lowest possible scenario so that if you get more than the lowest, that's when you can save more, invest more, possibly treat yourself a little bit. But sometimes treating yourself can look like an extra cup of tea instead of going to a 5-star restaurant, that costs you thousands of shillings.
Right.
And so if you want to reward yourself, that's okay every now and then, but also think about the amount you're spending on the reward compared to what you actually have coming in. And so it is being conservative on the income. If you don't have steady income, be on the conservative side. You always want to budget for worst case scenario, not best case scenario. Best case scenario is when you have extra money to invest and to save and you put it away for a rainy day. But you always budget for the worst case scenario. What's the least amount of money I can expect to come in? And what's the most amount of money that I can expect going out? And so you always want to think like that, because if not, the budget will never work. So you got to be realistic with that. So we first set up the income. So you put down the income first. At least you know what's the total amount you can spend. You can never spend more than you have. That's when you go into debt. And that debt has to be repaid at some time. And you don't really want to get into that. So you do that, and then you put down all the different items that is going out every single month. We all have either a mortgage to pay or house rent to pay. We have to live somewhere. So there's a cost of living that's going out, whether that is rent or you pay the bank. That is one big category. And of course, before that, you should tithe. You should always tithe, because if you want to be blessed in life, you got to follow the instructions in the Bible. And so we gotta start with the most important things. We gotta start with tithing. And the rich people also save first, and then they live off of the rest.
The rich, they save first, then they figure out how to live off the rest.
Right. So if you don't prioritize saving, it tends to not be there, because at the end of the month, there's been so many things you'd like to do, and no one really wants to save. So that if that is put on the bottom, you never get to it, because there's never enough money left. There's always wants that is going to occupy the budget. So that doesn't matter how much money is coming in. If you want to save, and every rich people does, you got to put that down first, after tithing and giving and then saving, and then you have to figure out how to live on the rest. And so if you don't prioritize like that, you will not see your savings go up, and you won't really ever have any extra money, because poor people are not poor because there's no inflow of money. Poor people are poor because they never prioritize to pay themselves first, and they never prioritize to save. And therefore, they always spend everything they have, or a lot of times more than they have. The statistics show that high-paying professionals, this is in America, but it may not be any other places, like lawyers, like doctors, so many of them actually are living paycheck to paycheck. Which
Very common.
Very, very common. And you are surprised to find out, but they have such a high income. Yes. And they have such a high expenses because they live in fancy houses, drive fancy cars they can't afford, and they send their kids to fancy schools. And by the end of the month, they have really spent everything that they had coming in. So it doesn't really matter how much is coming in. If you don't prioritize saving, you'll never have money.
Right. I remember we had a time where we always seemed to have more month at the end of the money instead of having more money at the end of the month. In other words, the money went empty before the month was up. We were living like that for a while. We had some credit card debt. It was very difficult to get started. And I remember that process of going through when we put the foot down and said, let's not add any more consumer debt. Let's not put any more on the credit card. Let's stay within the means. It was a tough discipline decision to make.
It's always tough to discipline yourself, because you have your habits, you like your habits, and that's why you're where you're at. And so it starts with a decision. You know, I've been doing this budget thing in class for several years now, and teaching at the Bible school. And we do one budget in class together as a class. It's always fun to do, because I let the students tell me the amount we should budget for, which is more of a typical income in the local economy. And then I tell them, you put in the numbers. How much should that person spend on housing? How much should they spend on utilities and all these things? And we go through it together. And of course, there's always different opinions. One of the years, we could not get the budget to balance. And so we said, okay, that person has to move to a different place, because the housing was too high and utility couldn't be paid, so they had to do cold showers. Those are not fun things to do, but that's the reality you have to face when there's not enough money in the budget to pay for all the things you want to do. And so it is then after the tithing and after the saving, you start with your most essential needs, which would be a place to stay, a housing, outflow, utilities, you need some electricity, some water have to flow into your house, and then food. We got to eat, right? But I've come to realize that the food budget can really go high and it can really go low. You know, if you have extra, you can spend extra on food and you just eat food you want more. And if it has to go lower, you can still survive and eat a different type of menu. And so the food budget, there's a lot of room there to bring it down if you have to bring it down. Now, that's not fun because, again, that affects your everyday living, what you can eat. But sometimes those are the things you have to do.
Right.
And then there's transportation is a big one. You know, you have to budget for going places. If you can't go places, you can't have an income, right? Because you most likely have to go to work, or you have to go because you have a business, or you got to move around. And so if you don't have your own car, there's public transportation you have to budget for. If you have your own car, you have to budget for both the fuel, but also for maintenance. You know, you have to change oil in a car. There's always things that breaks down and you have to repair it. There's tires that wear out and you have to buy new ones. So having a car is much more than just fueling it. It is taking care of it, and that costs a lot of money. And there's a lot of hidden costs in a car. And if you're not aware of that, and if you don't budget for it, you might realize that car is much more expensive than you thought it would be.
Right. So step 1 is finding out how you're currently doing with all your money right now. Step 2 is to make that budget, make those cuts. I remember with us when we said we're no longer going to add consumer debt, no more M-Pesa loans, no more credit card payments. So you end up early on, you have to live on a lower level than where you currently are. And that's part of what's really hard with this discipline, because you already feel like I should be making more. You want to put the emphasis on making more, but you have to learn how to cut first. But I remember after we cut and after we went through that very difficult season, because you can't have that extra cup of coffee, you can't have that extra whatever you were spending money on, which you thought wasn't enough anyways. But then there became room to give more, there became room to save more, and then it was only a matter of time and income started to increase. But anyways, step 1, find out how you're spending your money. Step 2 is make that budget. Then the question becomes, how do you ensure you stay within your budget? Do you use an envelope system? Do you use different bank accounts? How do you keep track of your spending every day to make sure you stay within the budget that you've made?
Well, that also depends on your personal preference. You know, you can use a cash system where you take everything you're going to spend out in cash and you divide it into different physical envelopes. For example, this is my food envelope, this is my transportation envelope, this is my miscellaneous envelope. And, you know, there are certain things that are just going to come out no matter what, which is rent, because that's the same thing every month. Utilities is usually around the same thing. So those things just have to go out first. And then what you're left over, you're going to then divide it into those things and activities you have to do throughout the month. And you can do a cash-based system where you just put that cash in envelopes. And when that cash is finished, that's finished for that month. And there's no more to use because it's physically, you see it. It is a bit powerful because you physically see it going down. And when you're getting close, you're like, oh my. You know, when you're using electronic, like a card or M-Pesa money, mobile money, you don't see the money. So it's like, you don't see the effect of it so much. But when you see cash, it's like, oh, the cash is getting less and less and less. And if I'm not careful now, it won't last me till the end of the month. So that's one of the powerful tools that if you're not used to disciplining yourself, it can be a great start for discipline.
Yes.
Because you physically see the money leave. It has a very powerful impact on you. And the other thing you can do is, if you want to get a bit more sophisticated, you could have different bank accounts that you use different things from. Like I put this money, this is my savings account, which by the way, you should have a separate savings account. First of all, you get a higher interest on that. And it's just a way, and it's not accessible. You know, if money is accessible, it tends to be used. So that's one thing. If you're in Kenya, you can get 2 M-Pesa lines. You know, you can have, if you want to divide them up and have them for different purposes, that's another way. You can say what's in my bank account is going to be used for this, what's on my M-Pesa is going to be used for that, and what is in cash is going to be used for that. So you still divide your money up into different places. But having money in different places works so much better because then when it's empty, it's not available. So if your transportation money is finished, but your food money is not, you can still eat. But
right.
you may walk. It's disciplining yourself so that you don't take from one category to the other.
So this is what we did in the early days. The paycheck would come in, and we would give the tithes. We would set aside some for savings, and then we would take the regular expenses, the rent and utilities. We would pay those, and then we were left with food and other discretionary categories. We would actually withdraw the cash and shove it into separate envelopes. And like you say, there was an envelope for food, and that was the food budget for the month. And when that starts getting low, then you have to get more creative with your meals for the rest of the month and figure out how to survive on just the rice or just the beans or something like that. One last question. How do you handle those sudden urges? You go to the mall, all of a sudden you see some clothes, oh, I really want that. Or one day you're in between meals, you're extra hungry, so you go, you see a coffee bar, you see someplace and you stop and you buy some snacks, it's not really in the budget. How do you handle that?
I think one of the highest disciplines that we need to develop is that we learn to have money without spending money. So even if you have money in your pocket, you learn to say no to those urges, even with money there, because that's how you discipline your body too in general. You say no to things. You know you can, there's things that go to the store and I'm looking at it and I know I can buy it. I have the money to buy it. But I still say no. I'm not going to, because I'm going to spend that money for something else. And therefore, I need to delay my gratification. I may save towards it, or I might do it a different month when there's other things I'm not going to buy. But having money and not spending money is one of the biggest disciplines you can develop. And those are going to be very crucial for your success in life in general. Because if you're not used to saying no to yourself, there's going to be other areas in your life too that you're not going to be disciplined in, and you're just going to follow what you feels good, feels, rewarding at the moment, and you're not going to see the long-term goal. So learning to say no to yourself is just a discipline we have to develop, and it will work in the area of money as well.
So again, it comes back to the issue of discipline. Like Proverbs said, whoever disregards discipline comes to poverty and shame. So discipline yourself for step number 1, that is find out how you're currently spending your money. Discipline yourself for step number 2, which is make a good budget. And then step number 3 is now ensure you stay within your budget. Today we have talked about budgeting. God wants you to be the head and not the tail. And if you start following some of these principles, you will find that with time, you'll be on your way up. We pray for you, and we ask for the Lord's blessings to be upon your life.
God bless you.
Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you again next Saturday.